If your goal is to increase earnings over time and pay for a lot of expensive things, like, you should just stop listening now. I'm writing for the people like you that need to like follow this deep yearning inside them for a different path, different kind of life, not bigger paychecks, but a bigger life.
Paul Millard is the author of The Pathless Path and a new book called Good Work. In this conversation, we explore how to find a way that you can actually pull off doing the thing you love as a profession and exploring a new definition for ambition.
Good work is this work that like fuels your soul. It helps you connect with yourself and the world at large. If you've experienced this, it's like amazing. You have to do it. When you stop it, you come back to it. It continually shows up in different forms in your life.
Paul shares how his entire life shifted once he started to focus on the work that brought him inner joy.
And then all these other benefits start showing up. Like, I felt better about my life. I was attracting good people into my life, like my now wife. I was able to show up as just who I was and not have to like project some performance into the world. And that was really nice. And then like some of the time I had doing work I care about, like reading and writing, even though it didn't pay well, it was so enjoyable. That's what I call like hidden benefits. So I went from a path where the benefits were visible and the costs were invisible because I was burying them internally.
What if the traditional path to success and living a good life was wrong? What if your best work in life was as easy as having the courage to do the things that you love doing right now?
It's funny, there's sort of this path of self-employment where people go build the funding mechanism first, but then burn out doing it and then come back to the work they actually care about. And so the question I asked myself early on is, how do I skip that phase? I'm just going to aim at the work I actually care about from the beginning. And so in 7.5 years, I haven't come close to burning out. There's basically been like nothing I've wanted to quit that was like hard to shut down.
Paul and I finished this conversation by sharing how maybe it's time we update the way we think about and define ambition.
Why do we think ambition is succeeding at some random company and like climbing the ladder and steadily increasing your paycheck? Why isn't ambition like doing what you actually care about? This is crazy.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Paul, what's up, man?
Not much. Excited to dive in, Scott.
Dude, I'm excited to dive into your new book. Is just so relevant is how I personally feel. I feel like so many people are trying to find this balance of loving what they do and also loving the lifestyle that their work gives them. And I think the way you started Good Work Out was just like such a profound reflection with like, wait a second, like I can actually do the things I like to do and that be my work. When did you have that like aha moment in your life?
Yeah, it sounds so simple, right? So the start of the book opens with this scene in Taipei, and it was about 1.5 years after I quit my job. I'm in Taipei. For the past few months, I haven't been trying to do any form of paid work because my formula was I need to escape work. I need to run away. I need to go live in the metaphorical beach and escape, right? We all have this urge, and I had the urge and then actually pursued it. But what I found in Taipei was that every morning I couldn't wait to start writing. And then one morning I'm just like, wait a second. I actually like this. There's nothing wrong with calling this work. And I pretty much decided like I'm going to build my life around this energy, this sense of connection I'm feeling, which felt like I wasn't actually articulating this well at the time. And it felt terrifying to sort of feel this, but like deep in my body, I was committed to this path. And in that first month in Taipei, like I had nothing to do. I hadn't made money in months. I had no idea what I was doing at all. But I just felt so sure about this connection I was feeling.
Why do you think, I mean, when I hear that, I think about, wow, you had an inspiration. You know, you had this natural desire to do this thing because of its intrinsic reward. And it feels like so many people think that that's risky. You know, that just following that is something that they can reliably do to build a life for themselves.
Well, that's something I try to convey in the book, that, yeah, it is risky. And I was like fully embracing that. I spent 10 years working in impressive jobs and strategy consulting, went to business school. I knew that it was definitely risky, and it was risky on a spreadsheet basis, right? Like I was pretty confident that the direction I was going to mean I was going to make less money. I was going to lose status. I was going to lose support of the people around me. But I had also experienced 10 years, and especially the final few years of that path, of just my complete dissatisfaction with my path. I wanted to escape so badly, and now I was experiencing something that was so good. It was kind of just like a screw it. Like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here if we're not actually going to do the things we care about? And so I was fully aware that chasing basically a feeling with how I felt in relationship to my work was pretty insane. And my last 6 years have been really about making sense of that. And there's a lot of chapters as part of that. But those first few years were really hard. It was helpful being in Asia because I was able to get some distance from some of those judgments, or even the projection of judgments for my own insecurity. I was able to get some safety from that and literally exist in a world that was in another language.
Wow. It reminds me, we recently had Boyd Vardy on the show, and he talked about that quote that's like, follow your bliss and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people miss is there's like a whole bunch of sentences after that quote that are like, but when you do this, you will be misunderstood and not accepted, basically, which I think is kind of what you experienced in terms of like how people reacted. You know, all these people like, Paul, what are you doing with your life? What are you going to do for money? Like all of that stuff.
Yeah. And so for me, there was a shift between it was a shift of moving away from my rational mind, pretty much basically deciding I wanted to shut that down. Now, leaning in this new direction, all the triggers in my head were going, this is silly, this is ridiculous, you should worry about making money, you should try to do X, Y, and Z. I knew all the playbooks, I knew the strategies, and it was leaning away from that and into that uncertainty. So at the same time, I felt that this is scary, this is terrifying. There was also this deep feeling inside of me that there is literally no other way. There is no other path. And I think I actually have a quote from Boyd in the book where he talks about this deep sense of knowing. I forget the exact quote, but it's like, there is a path, but I can't explain it to you. There's something like that. I forget exactly.
I think I remember
what it was.
It's like, I don't know the path, but I know like the next step. Something along those lines. I saw that quote in your book.
Yeah, it's more of like a deep knowing. And I think it's learning to trust. I was just so fascinated with this sort of emergent connection with myself and connecting with work that mattered to me and following these feelings. And I was sort of emboldened by the fact that I met my now wife about a month after arriving in Taipei, and I had this same connection and feeling with her. So at this time, I'm like committing to writing. I'm falling in love with this woman I'm going to marry. And everything felt right. like it felt good, and just the the way that was supposed to unfold. And that didn't mean I was like boldly just going after it all in. No, I had all these insecurities and doubt and fear and shame of like sharing this with people. But like I had to see it out. And it was such a better experience than what I had experienced the 3 or 4 years before I quit my job.
Yeah, it's a really interesting just bet to make, right? For people that are listening, that I imagine a lot of people aren't doing what they feel like is their life's work, where it's kind of like, all right, you actually have the sample data of like what this is, and like, okay, so you make a little bit more money, you get promoted, like you kind of know what you're getting. And you know, there for me, your journey almost sounds like my own like spiritual quest, where it was like it got to a point where I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Like life had made that choice for me, and there was no going back. And one of the telltale signs that I remember you talking about in Good Work was like there was these tasks that you could do in the back of your hand that were like so easy, right? But like you mentioned how like it was like such a struggle to get yourself to do these things. Like you had reached a breaking point.
Yeah, and looking back, it seems crazy because I don't have many tasks like this in my life. Uh, Everyone's had this experience of just having to do something one day and just sitting at their desk and just waiting. I'll do it. I'll do it after lunch. I'll do it by the end of the day. And I had this task after I quit my job, which basically took me all week for like a 15-minute task to do this consulting project that was paying my bills in the first year after quitting my job. And it just flashed me back to sitting in an office before I quit my job, in that final job, doing the same thing. Every day I'd have to go to the office, and I'd sit there all day on these days when I didn't have much work to do. I'd wait all day and then start my work at like 5 p.m. so I could leave by like 6:30, because I had to stay there anyway, because that's when everyone leaves the office. And now this just seems like insanity as a way to spend my time. But we normalize this, right? It's like, you have to work. It's all this learned helplessness of like, you got to have a job, you got to work. And it's like, maybe not. Like, maybe this isn't a good way to set up your life, right? Because it's going to just destroy you, and you're not going to be able to show up as the person you actually want to be in your life.
I think a lot of people hear this and they're like, I agree, by the way. But they're like, yeah, but I have a wife and kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have a mortgage. Yeah, but I have what would you respond to those yeah buts with?
Well, I have a wife and a kid. And I mean, we don't own a house. It's probably not viable in the short term. I just spent the last 8 months of my life not actively trying to earn income or increase earnings. My income's been declining for about a year now. I watch my daughter 2 days a week, and Angie, my wife, is writing a book now too. And like, she's not earning any money from it. She has no idea if she'll earn money from it. So I have found somebody that is aligned with living this way. But yeah, it's, if your goal is to like increase earnings over time and pay for a lot of expensive things, like, you should just stop listening now. Right? But this is something I learned early on in my writing, is that I'm not actually writing for those people. I'm writing for the people that that need to like follow this deep yearning inside them for a different path, a different kind of life. Not bigger paychecks, but a bigger life. Right?
Right.
And that's mostly who I'm writing for, because that's me. That's me 6-7 years ago, craving something more. But I didn't have role models. I didn't know how to bring it alive in words.
Yeah, it strikes me as there's like a trade-off of having that aliveness and authenticity and the upside that comes from that, which by the way, I think is priceless. I think there's like nothing more valuable than feeling deeply aligned with your inner truth.
Well, once you experience it, you start repricing your entire life, right? This is something I experienced. I was making $150,000 in a job in New York City, which a lot of that gets spent on restaurants and rent.
Right.
But I was offered a job for $100,000, aligned with my quote unquote passion of like making the workplace better, like basically doing consulting. But they were like, look, we know it's a pay cut, but it's more aligned with what you say you care about. I was so offended, right? $100,000. How dare they? That's $50,000 less than I make. Now, I've spent 5 of the last 7 years making much less than that, and far happier. And if somebody offered me either of those salaries to work full time, like I wouldn't do it, right? Because I now price my free time. I price my time with my spouse. I price my time with my child. I price writing time without the promise of getting paid for that extremely high. So I tell people to come up with a number that's sort of crazy to put on your time doing the things you care about. So I just like to joke that all that time, the writing with my wife, with my daughter, it's worth $1 million an hour. So you're going to have to make me a crazy offer to give some of that up, right? And of course there's sacrifices I make, but I try to limit the sacrifice for work that I make. So I've been extremely deliberate about trying to find ways to make money to fund this life, which forces me into a set of constraints which do drive creativity, but it is hard, and I'm constantly thinking about this. And I still don't have a ton of confidence in that I'm going to financially be stable for many years. But as long as I do have some funds to keep funding it, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, you talked 2 things I want to discuss in a little bit more depth. You talked about distinctions of different types of work.
Yeah.
That I think would be helpful, and then also that keep going point is something I would love to learn more about.
Yeah, so good work is this work that like fuels your soul, right? It helps you connect with yourself and the world at large, right? If you've experienced this, it's like amazing. You have to do it. When you stop it, you come back to it. You
can't not do it.
Yeah, it continually shows up in different forms in your life. However, you need to often fund that work, especially at first, right? And for me, that's where good enough work comes in. Good enough work is better than the work you want to escape, but it might not light you up in the deepest ways. You might have to make some sacrifices, but ideally, you're going to try to make good money from that and also still do things that are aligned with you. For me, that's been consulting skills workshops, and that emerged after I shifted away from consulting projects, which pay much better, and toward these workshops where I could teach these skills, I could train teams, and be involved in work like that. And that involves me doing a lot of content, writing, and sort of formulating of how I'm going to present and communicate ideas, which is pretty fun for me. Do I want to do it 12 months of the year? No. Would it make me a lot more money? Yes. But the goal is just to fund my good work. So at the beginning of this year, I did a couple workshops for corporations. They paid well. I lost the energy and steam in writing. But as soon as they were over, I locked in and basically dropped everything else. And over the last year, now that I have a daughter, I'm watching her 2 days a week. I've really struggled with the balance of all these things. You're probably like me, you love starting a bunch of new things. You're always having ideas. Yeah. Much harder with a kid.
Yes, true.
And I had my podcast and my newsletter, and I was doing those every week. And I basically had to stop those because I just wasn't finding the flow with my writing. And as soon as I leaned away from those, I was able to sink into writing even more. And I sort of created these anchors each week I'd do 3 3-hour writing blocks. And as long as I had those, I found that I could find like a flow and a pace. But the things like the podcast and my newsletter, they're what I call like supporting activities. They do give me energy. I love doing them. If I had infinite time, I would definitely do them weekly, if not more. But in this mode of book writing, they were distracting me from the real work. And so I had to pause them, which meant like less promotion for my previous book and less income. And so it's hard. It's this constant puzzle you need to figure out. And then, of course, there's bad work. And everyone knows bad work. Bad work is the work you want to escape. Bad work is the work that drove me to want to escape work in the first place. And I try to eliminate or minimize that as much as possible. But a key with that, too, is just not to be too stubborn, right? We all need money in today's world to fund our lives. And it's really just about how do you make sure that the bad work is not going to be too dominant such that it injects you with cynicism and pessimism about like your whole life strategy.
Yeah, I appreciate this idea that it's like a constantly evolving puzzle where you have to, see how the pieces and are accounted for, but with the core idea that like the good work, the soul work, like that should take precedence as much as you can possibly make it do
right.
that.
This was super easy for me before having a kid. After that moment in Taipei for about 5 years before having a child, I just had infinite time and a low cost of living while living in Asia. And even in the US, like me and my wife are not big spenders. We don't really have a lot of material possessions. And so I could just do whatever I wanted most days. The writing just happened. And after a kid, I really struggled. I think I had to update what I was really doing. I basically prioritized dad mode for the first 9 months. But after 4 months of having our daughter, I started writing. I started working on a draft of a book, but nothing felt right. I was always frustrated. I couldn't understand why. And after 9 months, I became determined I need to find my way back to this connection with writing. And I tried all sorts of things. I started experimenting with different work days, and I embraced a work week schedule, which I had rejected for 5 years. Me and my wife just did whatever most days, and it helped. And that is what led me to actually abandon the previous draft of a book I had written. I had over 55,000 words in a different book. And I decided, okay, I'm going to write about my connection with work. Why am I so determined to come back to this? Why does it matter to me? And that's basically what led to this book.
Wow. Abandoning a 55,000 page draft.
That might be my third book. But yeah, it was hard, but I just knew. What happened is I basically just opened up a new document and started writing this book. And I knew that I needed to explain why I was able to follow this path so confidently for years. The first 3 years after that moment in Taipei when I decided I would follow this connection to work, I made less than $40,000 a year, which is not great. I was basically breaking even for 3 years. But there was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to keep going forever. And
I mean, that's the thing, dude, is finding that muse, finding that thing that just electrifies your soul. And I just give you so much props for just committing, and prioritizing it. Cause I think that's where a lot of people, it's all the excuses that get in the way of really doing it.
Well, and it was scary too, but I think for me it was also a portal to personal growth. Yes. Because it forced me to sit with those fears. After those 3 years, I moved back to the US. And in that year, I think my income was around 60 to 70 grand. But based on the cost of living in the US now, that was not great. I knew, especially moving into downtown Austin, we were sort of optimizing around where we wanted to live. That probably meant breaking even again. But I didn't actually have much of a plan. I had a call with Stripe. I had one interview with them, and they were like, "What's your salary expectation?" I threw something crazy out. I was like, I don't know, 300 to 400 grand, and they were like, "That's not a problem." But my reaction to that was like, "Oh shit, they might actually consider me." And I emailed them the next day. I was like, "I am not going to pursue a job here." And it was all these moments of just having to recommit to my path. What do I actually care about? How do I keep going? And honestly, I can't really explain what happened with my first book, like The Pathless Path, but after about 9 months, it started taking off and the income just went like crazy. And I started in the second year, I made about 3 to 4 times what I'd made in the first year. Wow. And had my highest income year, basically in like year 6 of my path. And that was the first time I ever like made more than I did on my previous path, which was pretty wild. And that's something I try to talk about in the book. Do I think following the path of good work, can it make you rich? I don't know. I don't actually have evidence that that is true. This is not a book about getting rich and making as much money as possible. There are other people that talk about that much more effectively than me. But this is a book about finding a path where you feel good about your life.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. That I've realized in my own journey that aligns with this is like, at the end of the day, I think what people are really after is a feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it's a feeling of fulfillment in their life, a feeling of wholeness, right? And what you do with your time is a huge part of that. And so like, I think, man, it's just like, closing that gap of like where you are today to getting to that point. And this is where all the inner work stuff comes in from my perspective about like, well, why is it that you don't feel comfortable, you know, with the uncertainty? Why is it that you care about what everybody thinks? Like all this stuff. Was there anything for you in that 3-year period of like, that you talked about, that portal of personal growth that you did to really allow yourself to move through that?
Yeah, I think I tried to figure out a lot of stuff on my own, which was probably not the best strategy. But basically just facing my fears, like feeling uncomfortable and being okay with it and accepting those feelings instead of trying to make them go away. I think like me early on in your career, you did the same thing as I did, which is I want to feel better about myself. What's the best way to do that? Pursue worldly achievements.
Oh, yeah.
And it works. Like, this is the confusing thing. Doing that works because you get respect, you get admiration from others, you get admiration from women. But you have to keep going because if you stop, you'll have to face those feelings you're running from. Right. And what I found was by quitting my job and then leaning more and more away from stable paid work, I came face to face with those emotions and it sucked. It was so bad. I felt crappy about myself.
Yeah.
And others judged me. It was like people weren't rooting for me. They were like, "What are you doing? You're triggering my fears now." And so it's just this shame and guilt and crappiness vortex of it sucks. But I knew I didn't want to go back. So like the only option was through. And what I found over time was it's not that bad.
You will survive to fight another day.
And then all these other benefits start showing up. Like I felt better about my life. I was attracting good people into my life, like my now wife. I was able to show up as just who I was and not have to like project some performance into the world. And that was really nice. And then like some of the time I had doing work I care about, like reading and writing, even though it didn't pay well, it was so enjoyable. And that's what I call like hidden benefits. So I went from a path where the benefits were visible and the costs were invisible because I was burying them internally and I had to keep going to run from them. And I went to a path where the costs were visible. Oh, why would you do that? Isn't that so risky? It's like, yes, but you can't see the benefits I'm experiencing now. And those benefits are what enable people to keep going on these paths. Right? That sense of connection, that sense of flow, that deep knowing inside of you, that ability to sit with discomfort and be like, yeah, of course this is uncomfortable, but screw it. Let's keep going. Let's find out where this leads. I'm almost 7.5 years into this path. I have no plan 3 months from now. Like, I don't know if this book, which comes out next week, is going to make money. We don't know where we're going to be living. We don't have a plan for that. But it's also like, yeah, that it's uncomfortable, but also let's find out what emerges.
Well, what's striking to me is that the fact that you don't have those things inherently isn't a problem. It's like
right.
The relationship to that, right?
Yeah.
And I think most of us are people that just, when you haven't done the inner work of like learning how to like retrain yourself to be okay amidst the ambiguity, it's incredibly problematic. It's an incredibly uncomfortable experience, but you know, it doesn't have to be. And you forged yourself through facing all of those things to learn how to be okay in that experience. And that's the prize.
Yeah. And now I have more proof, right? So I wrote for 3 years without a plan, without really trying to even build the audience at the time. When I published my first book, I think I had 3,000 newsletter subscribers. And I wrote the book, I put it out in the world, and the book was just, it was the most satisfying experience. And it gets better with time. Like when I look back on it, that first book experience, like so magical. And you'll probably have this experience too, but it's like, man, that was so good. That's how I want to spend my life. And so now if I'm trading off like short-term, if I'm trying to acquire like short-term income for time I could otherwise be writing this second book, there's something to actually compare it to. Yeah. It's like, oh, I might be risking giving up another great book experience, which I think is probably going to be the case again. And so the more proof you have of these experiences and how you feel, you can weigh that against clear opportunities that other people see as the obvious thing to do.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about, learning to be okay with leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another hidden cost, right? Is a lot of people don't realize, like, when you take that opportunity that's like good enough work or like pay the bills work or whatever you want to call it, the trade-off is you're not spending the time doing the good work. You're not spending the time doing the life's work, the soul work for many people. And you just got to learn to be okay with sometimes just saying no to easy money.
Yeah. And you have to figure out where your own comfort level is, right? And so a lot of people I talk to, their comfort level is not at mine. They need more money. And the trap is trying to convince yourself you should be like me. No, you need to figure out where your own comfort level is. Actually own your desires, right? People like you referenced earlier are like, oh, I have a mortgage and kids. It's like, if you actually want a house, you need to be more realistic about the money you need, right? I happen to be married to someone where neither of us are all that interested in home ownership. Our rich life is not ownership, and that gives us a lot more flexibility and freedom to spend less money, right? So it's really about owning your desires and figuring out what do you actually really want, and then trying to figure out what are the trade-offs at the margin you're willing to make. I think the biggest thing I tried early on was, how do I actually transcend this idea that you need to make the money first and then do the thing you care about?
Which is such a common idea.
Yeah. And it's funny, there's sort of this path of self-employment where people go build the funding mechanism first, but then burn out doing it and then come back to the work they actually care about. So I've been doing this like online creator thing for 7.5 years now, a couple years longer than that while I was employed. And I've seen so many people throughout this time go through that hardcore hustle phase, shut their thing down, and eventually find their way back to the work. And so the question I asked myself early on is, how do I skip that phase? Because like I worked 10 years in the grind hustle phase. I want to skip the like build
Right.
and shut down and recover phase. I'm just going to aim at the work I actually care about from the beginning. And so in 7.5 years, I haven't come close to burning out. There's basically been like nothing I've wanted to quit that was like hard to shut down.
I mean, I think that says a lot right there, like just in terms of your alignment, but also the pace, right? And when I look at people, and I look at other podcasters, or I look at people that are really prolific creators, what I see is like they have that durability, and the durability is probably a function of doing the things they like.
Yeah, and it's also the story you're telling yourself about your relationship to the thing. So I haven't done a podcast episode in 6+ months. That's fine. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing the podcast because I love it. But it's on pause now because it's not the main thing. But I want to keep doing it, right? Yeah. I'm not failing. It's just not happening right now.
Yeah, I see.
Right?
I see that also as I see this pattern as well amongst people that like building and creating things as well, where they just keep adding things on, and then they feel this immense pressure to keep doing them, and they never see kind of pausing even being an option.
Well, did that happen with your podcast early on?
Well, my experience when I wrote my book was the same thing as yes, with one of the podcasts where I had a popular podcast and I shut it down to do my startup because I didn't think I could do both. But more recently, like I was like writing a newsletter, I was doing a podcast, and I was writing the book, and it just became too much. Like I couldn't do all of that, and so I just was like, I'm not going to write newsletters anymore. Yeah, and that's so be it. No big deal. I'll come back to it. But like, I've seen other people close to me be like incredibly frazzled by like an expectation they created for themselves and maintaining it. And it just doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah. The phrase I like to use is find a streak to leave a streak. I think early on, streaks are valuable. So do something every week, right? It can be really valuable to do that for a year. You get in the rhythm, you know what it feels like, and you have the confidence, I can do this. But then don't hold yourself to the streak. Like take a random week off. So early on with my writing, I said I write most days and I publish most weeks. And in that, like there's a lot of looseness. I'm not like this, I have to write every day. Some people need that, so that works for some people, but for me, I know I love writing so much, it's going to happen. Right? I'm always going to be finding ways to like make it happen. But early on when I had a lot of space and no child, I could just be like, write most days. It happened most days. And I just wrote so much. And so I was able to notice, okay, I don't need to be super serious about shipping every week. If I take a week off my newsletter, that's fine. I've now done this is my second newsletter. This one has 274 issues. A previous one had over 100. But yeah, I've 274 issues. I'll probably make it to 500. I don't know how long that will take, but I don't see stopping it. I'm still having just as much fun as those first like 10 issues I was writing.
How the word ambition is an interesting one that you talk about the book and kind of how your definition evolved with that. I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Yeah, ambition terrified me early on in my path. I think I just categorically rejected everything from like the career world, hustle, all of that. It was like, it's stupid. You should just chill. You should just relax, like live a slow life. And then I talk about this conversation I had with my friend, Chris Abdelmessa. He's another writer who I love reading. But having a conversation with him, this was in Taipei before I published my last book, about 3 to 4 years into my journey. And he's like, I love what you're doing. So great. Keep going. He's like, you're one of the most ambitious people I know. And I was like so triggered. I'm like, no.
Which is funny because most people would love that compliment in our, modern society.
No, what it triggered is I didn't really believe fully in myself yet. And I'm still somewhat insecure about my path, if I'm being honest. But it was like, no, like I'm not even making any money. I have no proof this can work. We're moving back to the US. We want to have kids. Like I'm going to be like failing. And I didn't reclaim that word for myself until moving to Austin, honestly. And it was being around people like you, on weird paths, doing things like writing that don't quite make sense, especially to make money. Like writing is just not a great thing to make money. If you can write really well, usually you can make money more effectively by like getting a job or doing other things. But yeah, being around people like that, and I was just like, okay, ambition. Maybe this is ambitious. And then I sort of got angry. I'm like, why do we think ambition is succeeding at some random company and like climbing the ladder and steadily increasing your paycheck? Like, why isn't ambition like doing what you actually care about?
Truth.
Like, this is crazy.
Truth.
Right? And I was like, screw this. I'm going to just call myself ambitious and try to reclaim and steal this word back from the culture. Right? And so like, let's steal work back. Let's steal ambitious back and make it our own. And that's really what I'm trying to do with this book. Like that's the underlying provocation. And it's like, work doesn't have to suck. It can be great. It can be amazing, but maybe it won't make money. And maybe that is the most ambitious thing you can do.
I certainly think it's to accept the call of your soul for what you just makes you feel alive today. I think that's actually harder than just taking the predictable path for most people.
Yeah, it's harder until you experience the other way. Then it's harder to go back. I think
100%.
I think going back to my former life would be very hard for me now.
It's not even an option. It's just like it's too hard to even consider.
No,
how I feel.
I would do it if I needed like to raise funds for my daughter. I would do anything for my daughter, but I would be very creative in other options before I had to like go back into some job I really didn't like, right? But I would do it if I had to. I would make it as short as possible and as impactful as possible to like raise whatever funds I needed to meet my needs. But yeah, I would still do it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think more people will get in touch with this way of relating to work? Like what would need to happen on a cultural or societal level to shift things a bit?
I don't want to drive societal change. I don't have grand ambitions of like impact or numbers served. I really just want to help like individuals who are already thinking about these things. And I think a lot of it is about rewriting your own scripts for your life, right? It's basically propaganda of our culture, which is here's how you should live your life. Here's what you should do to be a good person. And a lot of people have that running rent free in their heads. Now, a lot of times these scripts were useful at one point, right? I talk about my wife growing up in Taiwan. We're not the kind of people that make money, right? That was probably a useful script growing up in Taiwan in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Limited labor rights, a country that was still trying to break its way into middle and higher income industries, 6-day work weeks. Maybe that made sense, right? Now, like my wife's now has U.S. labor rights, probably not the most useful script, right? Similarly, like put your head down, suffer at work. Was that useful for me to like learn skills and push forward and stay committed to things early in my career? Yeah, probably. Maybe it's even helpful in writing my book and like putting my head down and powering through something that's hard. I think it's helpful. But at a certain point, you sort of overlearn those scripts.
Right.
Right. And I think finding an off ramp and embracing new scripts that fuel the next chapter of your life is really hard. And that even align with the opportunities we have. Like we never stop to say, okay, we've made some progress. Maybe I'm earning a little more than I need right now. Let me try to reorient my life towards things that will make me feel alive now.
Well, what's coming up for me is like, where do those scripts come from and who do they serve?
Yeah.
And we live in a highly consumerist culture in the country that cares all about GDP. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say there's people behind the scenes that are like, let's create a culture that's obsessed with buying and producing so that we can be number one. But I don't think I don't think we have a lot of evidence that really creates enduring well-being and happiness.
Some people thrive in jobs, right? And I think it's really about being honest about is the script actually serving you? I don't think there's like a vast conspiracy to like persuade people to stay employed in jobs they hate, but it's an emergent condition that a lot of people adopt that has been handed down from previous generations, might have served previous generations better, right? Like blow up your life, go out on your own in the 1980s, probably not as broadly useful to as many people, right? Working in an organization that was growing at 10% a year, probably a pretty good script.
IBM was like everyone's dad worked at IBM.
But it might have been a good script, right? Because what were the alternatives? There was no internet. There was no like, there wasn't this whole digital economy to try different things. But like, does that still serve you? I don't know, right? And just being honest that, okay, I'm doing this because it just gives me a feeling of safety. At the end of the day, we all want to feel safe, right? And what I'm trying to show people is that there might be this transition you can make of rewriting your scripts, taking a different path that will feel unsafe, but you might arrive in another place that actually feels safer. So I feel safer on my current path than I did on my former one, which seems crazy to people, but it feels safer because I can just wake up and show up as myself every day. And that feels good. And I feel confident about that. And I've been able to show up as the father I always dreamed of and as a spouse that is aligned with what he cares about. And I don't think I could have done that in my previous job. There would have been a lot of like, I think like Johnny Miller calls this allostatic load. There would have been a lot of excess load on my body and system in that former path coming home to a family. Now I don't have that. I can like stand up from my desk, walk over to the other room and start like playing with my daughter. And like that ability to flow and show up as that fully engaged person, that is everything to me.
And also, I mean, what an example for your daughter and, you know, potentially future children, like to live a fully aligned life, man.
Yeah. And that's the goal. I think our values like curiosity and creativity are part of our family values. And we constantly have to remind ourselves, how do we actually boldly show up with that? So right now, me and my wife are both working on books. And we're not expecting, like, we don't have expectations of like, they have to be this way. They have to like honor us for this. Like, I think that's always a mistake to say, oh, I'm making this sacrifice for my kids and they better honor me for it. It's like, no, we want to set an example. If it inspires her and hopefully our future kids, great. But if it doesn't, at least we're also living the life we want to be living.
Yeah. Nice, man. Well, I'm finding this very inspiring to hear about, you know, the ways that you guys do things. And I think it's beautiful, man.
Thanks.
I really do. So I think we're coming to time here, but tell us about Good Work. When can we get it? Everyone listening, I read it. I read it in a day. It was that good. So I highly recommend it.
That's always so funny to hear because it took me like 9 months to write, but it's the most flattering thing you could hear as a writer, that like somebody didn't want to put it down. I appreciate it. You've been a huge inspiration to me too. You're really following the work you care about.
Thank you, brother.
That's huge for me to have other people like you around that make me feel normal. Even though we're all kind of crazy.
And by the way, I think for people listening, like, and I know you do this with the Pathless community, like, man, just to have other people that are thinking and feeling and going through the same things. I mean, that is so critical and helpful at these type of liminal periods.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this now, Good Work will probably be out. You can find it at pmillard.com/goodwork. I haven't set up a book site for it yet. I'm actually going to do what I'm calling a post-launch launch, where I'm just going to promote it after it's out in the world rather than doing a pre-launch. I just didn't actually find the time to do the pre-launch, and I like doing it afterward anyway. Also, in my book, The Pathless Path, you can go to pathlesspath.com. You can also find links to Good Work there. I do have a community for finding the others. It's a one-time fee gift payment. You can pay what feels right and join forever and try to find others making sense of their journey.
Thank you, brother. Well, everybody, those will be linked out, so you can find them in the show notes. And thanks again, man. It was a true pleasure to just spend this time with you.